Before we start our questioning, I just want to ask any of the members whether or not they have any interest to declare. I would like to declare that I was formerly an employee of the BBC and I have a deferred member of the BBC pension scheme. Giles Watling?
Yes, I'd like to declare that I occasionally receive royalties from the BBC and I was once a member of the BBC Club.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to declare anything? Forever hold your peace. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Brilliant. So, as I say, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm going to put my first questions to you, Mr. Davie, as the new Director General.
Awesome.
Thank you. I'd like to focus first on your speech to staff, which obviously drew a lot of attention. As the new Director General, you stated that renewing your commitment to impartiality was your number one objective. In what ways do you think the BBC has been failing in terms of being impartial, and why do you think that is, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, as I set out in the speech, my key concerns were not historical issues in terms of left or right politics, frankly. And you know, the pursuit of impartiality is always going to be an imperfect art. And I think you can look back and say there were things that we've often omitted, things we didn't get spot on. But my speech was not focused on that. It was actually focused on audiences and audience value. And the research is pretty clear, actually. We've had a number of recent surveys suggesting that actually on the left-right axis, you know, it's pretty balanced. Marginally people think we're slightly more left-wing. Most people think we're pretty much in the middle. And actually, when it comes to a trusted news source, we are well ahead of anyone else. In fact, our trust ratings through COVID have gone up. So that wasn't the issue. But I did say there were two things that I was concerned about. And I do believe that if the BBC isn't a trusted source, then that, I use the word bedrock, then you can't build on other things. And I think, in fact, in this world, it's going to become more rather than less valuable as a trusted source. And there were two threats to impartiality, Chair, that I noted. The first was that in this age, I think that the pursuit of impartiality can often be seen as almost unachievable with so much noise in social media. This group will be very aware of that. And there was some research actually among under 35s that said most of them find it quite hard to get the notion of impartiality at all. And they ascribe everyone who asks any question of any politician or anything of myself with a political motive. So I wanted to renew our vows on impartiality as something that was a deliverable, plus also we needed to be very clear with audiences that that is what we were doing. The other point was I do think there are voices beyond Westminster voices, beyond politically aligned voices, where, you know, research shows that institutions, and I know this is being talked about in the political realm as well, institutions that don't uncover diverse voices, voices that frankly sometimes don't feel connected with the metropolitan areas, we need to get to them. They are paying their license fee and they want to know that their voices are being heard. That's what the points I was making.
You did actually say in your speech about changing from the internal to the external. Is that about the point that you've just made? Effectively about this idea of the metropolitan elite and wanting to reach, in political terms, we think of that as sort of red wall constituencies. Is that what you mean in terms of connecting, not just diversity in terms of groupings of BME groupings, but actual diversity in terms of social background?
Totally. And I think one of the, I've done a lot of work on, and I will no doubt come to it in the morning's discussion around other minority groups, protected minorities. But actually, I think one of the key vulnerabilities for institutions, if they don't have deep socio-economic diversity, and also, I think institutions, London-based institutions, no one has done more, I think, than the BBC to push ourselves out of London. Again, we can talk about that later in the morning, I'm sure. But absolutely, one of the things we want to do is we are funded by every household, and I said in my speech, across the land. It is actually critical that we aren't associated with one particular point of view or perspective on life. And there are dangers, and I don't think the BBC is unique to this, but there are dangers when institutions surround themselves with people internally. And frankly, it's straightforward. The BBC can be made very complex, But at the end of the day, we have a simple brief, which is to make sure every household that's paying the licence fee gets good value from it.
Okay. I would probably take issue with the idea of serving across the whole country. As a West Midlands MP, we get the poorest return for our licence fee. However, I know that colleagues are going to talk about regional broadcast very shortly. Is what you're saying...
Well, just Chair, if I may, the Midlands general impression of the BBC is up there at 6.7, in line or ahead. So it's not just hours received; it's also, and I take the point, by the way. I think there are things for us to do across the country which we can talk about. But I take the point. But I think our actual base provision across the country remains pretty solid.
Yeah, £12.50 for every licence fee is the return that West Midlands gets on this. It's 5.3 million people, roughly the size of Scotland. And currently, you know, what used to be Pebble Mill is now obviously the mailbox is hollowed out. So, look, we could be all day basically talking about the West Midlands, but what I would say to you is Indeed. I think that, you know, my perception is not what you're saying there in terms of the regional, your regional delivery. Now, just moving back to the point that you just made there in terms of this sort of reaching out to different demographics, talking about the idea of being almost too internal, and the idea of basically not being talking in an echo chamber, if you like. I suppose that's what we're sort of talking about here. Is this just a simpler way of recognising the criticism that was made by the Secretary of State when he said that the BBC was too woke? Is that correct? Are you now saying, effectively, that the Secretary of State had a point?
No. I think the Secretary of State made the point around the dangers around metropolitan focus, and I recognise that issue. I really do. I think there's always a risk that institutions that are based in I mean, I've done this in my commercial career. At the end of the day, you have to be utterly focused on your paying audience. You know, I don't know. We have to use the term customer carefully here, but at the end of the day, I have to deliver as the leader of the BBC. Every house in the Midlands, every house in Birmingham has to feel the £157.50 offers excellent value. I take that challenge. That's what we're about.
Okay. Did you think that the BBC's coverage of Brexit in any way broke trust with certain parts of the UK public, particularly in the north of England, as reflected in the general election of December 2019?
Well, I suspect if we go back into deep history of various
it's not deep history. It's current. It's current right now, as we well know, as we approach the deadline for a trade deal.
If you want to talk about our current delivery, I think the research is very clear that actually we're trusted. The way we've covered the latest crisis has been, I think, exceptional in terms of the way we're covering our history. In terms of the Britain and Brexit, coming to your question, Chair, because I know I'll frustrate you if I just bring it straight to the current. I think I have been very clear that overall I am very proud of the BBC. I think its record on impartiality is exceptional. But if you read my speech, it is pretty clear that we have a much more polarised country. We have a nation that has strong views across the divide, and sometimes, in the pursuit of trying to get things, getting different political perspectives, I think we did a good job in that. But there are no doubt people sometimes say, look, I would like to hear my point of view more represented by an institution like the BBC. We take that challenge. Okay,
but so just to answer the question, do you think that the BBC's coverage of Brexit in any way broke a sort of bond between the BBC and some parts of the United Kingdom?
I haven't got evidence to suggest that. I've got the overall trust scores in the BBC have held up, and overall, actually, as an institution versus other institutions, we did well in terms of maintaining our trust. I just don't want that to indicate complacency, because I think there is definitely some people who feel the BBC is too distant and their views are not represented. And that is, so I've got the data, which I could give you is somewhat comforting versus norms for other institutions, and our trust scores, Chair, have remained strong throughout this period, if you look at them. But I take the point, there is areas of the country that would like to feel their voices are more represented, and groups that would like their points of view more represented on the BBC. And I've offered that challenge. I'm not complacent on that.
Okay. You say that opinionated columnists and campaigners shouldn't be working at the BBC. You were very clear about that in your speech. Are you prepared to terminate the contracts of those who do breach the rules on impartiality, whether on social media or on air?
Well, I'm prepared to take the appropriate disciplinary action all the way to termination, yes.
Okay. So if, for example, I'm a well-known sports presenter and I tweet in a reply to the Prime Minister, where the Prime Minister states, you can only meet people who don't live with you outside, whatever the weather. And the sports presenter says, think they're hoping everyone gets pissed so they forget about their leadership or lack of. Is that an appropriate thing to be saying? Is that a disciplinary matter under your brave new world at the BBC?
Well, just to be clear about where we're at on because I think we could play, and I fear I may frustrate slightly, but if we go back and look at every historical tweet, as I come into the job, what I've done, well, I'm coming to the point, which is what I want to do, and I take the point. What I want to do is we are going to be publishing in the next few weeks, and this is imminent, clear social media guidelines. And they will cover both news and current affairs and beyond news and current affairs. And we will have within those guidelines the enforcement policies will be very clear, which is we'll be able to take disciplinary action, we'll be able to take people off Twitter. I know people want to see hard action on this.
Sorry, did you just say you'll be able to take? Sorry, excuse me, Mr. Davie. Did you just say you'll be able to take people off Twitter?
Well, if they want to work for the BBC, I can ask people to, I can say you would suspend their Twitter account, absolutely. Right,
okay. Now, just on that point then, I noticed an interesting exchange a little while ago, not historic, between Jonathan Agnew, a broadcaster I respect a great deal actually, and Mr. Gary Lineker. Now, in this respect, he stated, Jonathan tweeted Gary, said, Gary, you are the face of BBC Sport. Please observe BBC editorial guidelines and keep your political views, whatever they are and whatever the subject, to yourself. Mr. Lineker in return said, Jonathan, I'm the face of my own Twitter account. I continue to tweet what I like, and if folk disagree with me, then so be it. Thank you so much for your concern, which I imagine wouldn't be a concern at all if you agreed with me. So who is right in that instance? Is it Jonathan Agnew saying to Gary Lineker, effectively, you need to follow BBC editorial guidelines, and I would be sacked, as in one rule for one rule for another, or is it Mr. Lineker?
Well, as I say, a couple of things. One is we will issue the social media guidelines, which will be clear. The second is I would note that Gary Lineker has actually been very clear in his statements recently, saying, I understand I have responsibilities when working at the BBC. Those responsibilities will be clearly laid out, and my belief is, as I say, I am now the Director General, so I'm running the show, and in my view, party political statements are not the right thing for people to be making if they are as part of an impartial news organisation. One thing I would say, by the way...
Excuse me, Mr. Davie, you just said impartial news. Do you actually mean that only if they're in news or outside news?
No, I mean, we will come back with social media guidelines to make clear where the lines are. Okay, but I think if someone is, just to be clear, Chair, if someone, just to warm to your theme, if someone is a face of the BBC, I think entering into partial politics, partial party politics, seems to me not the right place to be, and I've been very clear on that. Now, there are some complications for us to work through in terms of contractual arrangements, all the various things. But I have to say, I think the audience is less bothered by contractual status. My role as the Director General is to absolutely make sure that the BBC's impartiality is first and foremost protected. Now, the final thing I'll say is I do think there'll be, I know everyone would like me to fire anyone, or some people would like me to fire immediately there as a foot fault. I'm sure over your career and my career, sometimes we have not acted perfectly. So there'll be a range of enforcements. Yeah. So sometimes someone just needs a talking to. Other times there are serious matters or there's a real problem. But the issue here.
Does it depend how big a star they are? Sorry, Mr. Davie, does it depend how big a star they are, whether or not they get a talking to or they get action?
No, it doesn't. I do think for what it's worth, there's a difference between people who appear on the BBC as an irregular contributor versus those people who are clearly faces of the BBC and regular contributors. Because what I don't want, you see, as editor-in-chief, I do want to have an organisation where you could get opinionated people, you could get polemic, but if people are the face of the BBC, see, I step back from the whole thing. Listen, in terms of my priority and what I've tried to do in terms of listening to people is say very clearly that the overriding concern here is the BBC is seen as an impartial organisation that absolutely understands and responds to the views of the British licence fee payers. It is damaging to us if we are aligned with any party political interest. And it's a very, very straightforward brief for me.
Okay, thank you.
Difficult to deliver, by the way, Chair, but it's a straightforward brief.
I can appreciate it's a tightrope. Just to briefly move on to decriminalisation and evasion.
Indeed.
Now, it does seem to me from many quarters that the government is very minded towards decriminalisation. What plans are you actually putting in place in order to cope with that? Bearing in mind, of course, that evasion has gone up to 7.2%, 1.3% above target, which is roughly £50 million, I think, to your bottom line.
Right.
So, first of all, what plans are you doing? What plans are you taking or putting in place in order to cope with that? And what do you think it is effectively? Is this the long-term efficacy of the licence fee from which you derive something like 70% of your income?
Okay. We might want to, there's quite a lot there. So I think the first thing is I might want to just say something on decrim, then I might hand to Glyn just in terms of licence fee monies, if you want to do that now, Chair, because in terms of where we are.
Well, I'll tell you what, just cover decriminalisation at the moment, and colleagues of mine will come in on the finances later.
Perfect.
That's all right.
Quite a lot, yeah. I think with decriminalisation, the first thing is it's a bit early for us to make assumptions on exactly what the government will or won't do. I understand certain press stories and this, that, and the other are running, but the truth is we're yet to see the first consultation, the questions around the second consultation. So it's quite early days in terms of us looking at what the learnings are. I mean, the BBC's position is I think, crystal clear on this and endorsed by the Perry report and numerous bits of analysis, which is, regardless of any broader debates about the licence fee, as it's currently configured, I think this system logically is hard to beat. If you're a law-abiding paying customer and licence fee payer, what I'm trying to do is get you most value for money. And the decriminalisation proposal, frankly, in my mind, just doesn't pass the logic test. And it's not purely about ideology, it's simply about what's the most effective way in which you get money from the BBC. And the issue with the decriminalisation, as we know, some of the big statistics that are bandied around are questionable in themselves. In magistrates, time spent in magistrates' courts, 0.3%. Number of people going to prison in last year, 5, and that was for, as I understand it, multiple issues around debt payment, not payment of debts.
Yeah.
And
With respect, Mr. Davie, also it's the biggest means by which that young women are criminalised in this country.
Well, I understand. And we are sensitive to that. No one wants to see anyone go to prison, or no one wants to see criminal records. But the actual numbers of themselves are low in relation to the millions and millions, 25 million, law-abiding citizens who are paying the system. Now, the issue is, I've got the sensitivities. I worry about the sensitivities. No one wants to see people going through, suffering if they have issues with regard to payment, all those things. But the issue is the alternative. The alternative, if you look at civil systems, the fines are higher, the bailiffs arrive at the door, the system just is not good. So no one's proposed a system to us that beats the current system logically. So our position as the BBC is, in the interest of law-abiding, licence fee payers, and in the interest of just efficiently collecting money with the right level of sanction. As I say, no one wants to see anyone go to prison. The numbers are remarkably low, and no one wants to see that. But actually, the current system for us is the best, and you know, it's not just the BBC saying that. The government did the Perry report and laid it out very clearly. Yep. So that's where we are.
Just on that point, of course, obviously when the Secretary of State appeared before us, he was he was quite dismissive actually of the Perry report, which is obviously a very substantial piece of work. He said, "Oh, that's 6 years ago." So that was his approach in that respect. Just as a sort of visionary at the top of the organisation, a bit of vision for us, if you like. Do you think the increase in licence fee evasion, obviously up now to 7.2%, well over target, is that rooted in societal change in some way? And what are your sort of views in terms of what the BBC needs to do in order to basically not just reduce evasion in terms of trying to capture those who are evading, but also in the offering and what they're actually trying to achieve?
Sure. And I think there's two answers. There's two time frames on that question, if I may, Chair. One is the short. Well, what I mean by that is there's the short-term issues, and I can hand to Glyn in a minute. But there's short-term issues around COVID, all payments being. Do you see what I mean? So there's some factors that clearly impact us, and also in the short term, the actual evasion rate, if you look at it versus other countries around the world. We're in a very strong position. I mean, I think our evasion rate is low. It remains low. We're slightly behind target, but there's some things regarding COVID and other things that we can see impacting us. I don't, however, dismiss fully your challenge, if it is that, which is part of my strategy as the Director General. I've been very clear that, you know, for those who've read my speech, it's pretty clear that I don't that I introduce jeopardy into the game, Chair. Yeah, which is. You know, unless we really work together, and I think we'll need support to do this, and it's a winnable battle, but we need to make sure in the world of internet-enabled kind of hyper competition, the BBC keeps delivering value. And I think that is under pressure, and we'll need support, and I think people need to fight for the BBC, and we need to do our work as well to make sure we're relevant, we're differentiated and focused. We can talk a bit more about that later when it comes to PSB review. So I don't think we're free from external pressures. I'm not saying everything's okay, but I do think this particular period in terms of evasion, one is the overall rate is reasonable. It's a bit ahead of our target. But Glyn, I don't know whether you want to say anything in terms of just the latest.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Our licence fee collection is driven by a number of factors, including evasion, household growth, and sort of consumer behavioural changes. In last year, we did have a slight fall off, but I think we should put that in the context of over the last 6 years, we've had increases that have gone up, and also we've had momentarily falls, but broadly collected 25 to 26 million licences. Every year.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Ishmael. We are well aware of the figures. We had a briefing from the National Audit Office on this. I mean, you know, the fact that the simple matter is that you're 50 million under target, and that evasion is increasing as a result. My point to Mr. Davie was very simple. It's basically, is this a societal change? But we sort of got a half an answer in that respect. So thank you for that. Can I ask you, Mr. Davie, directly? Is it acceptable in any way that someone who's previously been convicted of non-payment of the licence fee should be appointed BBC chairman?
Well,
yes or no?
I hope throughout the morning I answer questions directly, but the one thing as the Director General I don't think I should do, and this will not surprise you, is talk about who is the right candidate.
I have no one in mind, Mr. Davie. I'm just saying, do you think it should bar an individual from the job if they have been convicted of non-payment of licence fee?
And
it's a criminal offence.
But with respect, I don't run the appointment process for my boss, and I think that's appropriate. I put my trust in the process, and I'm confident in the process, and I will let others decide who is the right person to lead the BBC. I'm not going to make judgments on whether what the right criteria are on that. I just think that's the wrong thing for me to do. I've got a job to do in terms of running the BBC. I'm going to get on with it. I need to reform it. I need support from a chair to do that. And I've worked with many great chairs in my time. I expect to work with another one based on the process.
Okay. All I'd say to that is that effectively, what you're saying there is it's not me, Gov, and it's not my responsibility, etc. So I do understand that. But surely as an organisation which is absolutely wedded in change to the licence fee, which is 70% of its revenue, to have a chairman, whoever that may be, to be convicted of non-payment of a licence fee seems to be completely beyond the pale. It's almost like being convicted of fraud and being in a bank. You know, it's just not. Or
Am I allowed to interrupt, Chairman, or not?
Yeah, of course you can, Sir David. Go on.
You've raised an issue for the Director General, and quite rightly, he has his head down running the organisation. The issue about who his new boss is not a matter for him, nor is it a matter for me. But I do have some comments on it, and I've clearly reflected on it, because it would be hard to ignore what has been going on. This announcement about, or the announcement that we're looking for a new chair, is a matter for the government, and finally it's a matter for the Prime Minister. But it's an important matter for the government, and if I may say so to you, it's an important matter for the DCMS committee, who will need to satisfy themselves in the pre-appointment hearing which you will hold, both the proper process has been followed, and that the candidate has the appropriate qualities. So the question you've asked my Director General is much more one for you than for him. On the question of the process, there's of course a public appointments process which will be overseen and needs to be followed. And the Charter is absolutely clear. Article 22 of the Charter says clearly, the appointment may only be made following a fair and open competition. So due process is important. In line with this, I hope the government will encourage well-qualified candidates to apply, so that there is a strong and diverse field, rather than putting them off by giving the impression that there is already a preferred candidate. On the question of qualities that you asked my DG about, and he quite rightly isn't going to be drawn, the qualities of the candidate, but he did say in his first speech, the BBC is about being free from political bias, guided by pursuit of truth, not a particular agenda. And he particularly went on to say, if you want to be an opinionated columnist, indeed you quoted this back at him a little while ago, if you want to be an opinionated columnist or a partisan campaigner on social media, that's a valid choice, but you should not be working at the BBC. But the point I want to make is that impartiality starts at the top of the organisation. It doesn't start halfway down. It starts with the chair and the board. If the candidate comes from that sort of background, he or she will need to be able to demonstrate to you that they have left their strong political views at the door. Impartiality starts at the top of the organisation.
Yeah, that's fine. We actually are writing to the Secretary of State to outline the committee's concerns over the news stories that were emerged this weekend. We decided at the private meeting earlier today, so that will be being sent to the Secretary of State in that respect, because I think you are absolutely correct in the fact that the processes need to be absolutely open, and we look forward to eventually having our hearing in terms of the confirmation of the new chair. Steve Bryan.
I'm pleased to hear it, Chairman. You clearly have a part to play in this game, as does the government, and the BBC does not. The decision on who the new Director General was, as you and I discussed last time, solely a matter for the board, but the decision on who the next chairman will be, my replacement, is, as we've just discussed, for the government and for your committee.
Okay. Steve Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Hello, Tim. Congratulations on the new job.
Thank you.
I don't want to make this the Gary Lineker show, because that would be tedious. But I'm curious. You've struck a very strident tone on this issue of social media, and I'm going to ask you about younger audiences in a minute. So this is linked, because in many ways social media is how they roll. It's where they, putting it out there and being controversial is how you build an audience. I get that. Maybe Gary is ahead of the field on that. But there were reports, obviously, of what you said, and you just backed it up this morning in pretty robust terms. But I wonder if you were aware of the exchange on social media with Gary Lineker following your speech, when basically people were suggesting that he should be very concerned about his social media tweets, given what you said, to which he just replied, nah. And then a BBC spokesman said Lineker's not involved in any news or political output for the BBC, and as such any expression of his personal political views does not affect the BBC's impartiality. He seems to be mocking you. he seems to be sneering at you and your new drive around social media. So I guess what I want to know is, are you aware of that? And what prompted this reforming zeal from you as one of your first acts to take on some of your biggest stars in how they present themselves on social media?
Yeah, well, we can go. Let's do the last bit first, which is I think what prompted me really, and you're going to come onto it, which is we're in a tough environment if you care about impartiality. We really are, because everyone's got views. The quickest way, as this committee will know, to get followers is to do something controversial. And I think the pressure on everyone, and journalists and people in the public eye, to go for the extreme, push basically partial views is very real. And you can see that, by the way, across the media landscape. By the way, I think there's some, that's clearly something that Ofcom needs to think about in terms of navigating the course here. But what I wanted to do in my speech, and by the way, I think this is well supported. And I mean, this is I don't want to speak for the staff, but I think it's well supported across the BBC. And I think that what I needed to do was say that we have had a few tweets and a few incidents where people, frankly, just by virtue of things like retweeting or what they've said, in my mind, has not furthered the BBC's reputation for impartiality. And that's what I'm about. Now, then we come to your points on Lineker. Yeah. Look, I think Gary's always got a flavoursome turn of phrase. What I would say is Gary has said since, and the thing is to judge now us as the BBC on what we tweet, how we tweet, and and our social media profile. I think Gary has been very clear that he has said that he's not concerned by it. What he said, and you can let the man speak for himself, but he said he understands his responsibilities as a person within the BBC. Now, the good news is I'll be making that even clearer as I go through my social media guidelines. Final point for me, if I may, is, and this may link to your next point, is I don't think this is about banning people on social media, by the way. We must be out there. But I happen to, and one of the things I was trying to, I passionately believe that impartial reporting can be flavoursome. The idea that it's dull is wrong. Actually, the pursuit of truth, the looking at evidence, you don't have to be a partial voice. It may not get you immediately as many followers, but I think over time, that's what the BBC must do, and it'll be more distinctive for it.
Yeah, so you've asked Richard Sambrook, haven't you, to carry out a review of all of this?
Indeed.
Channel 4 News carried out a similar process last year, I believe, to look at the impartiality of their presenters on social media. So I pray for your soul that it goes better than theirs did. What do you expect from Richard's work?
Well, what I expect is some clarification. What we're going to do in the next few weeks, so is very specifically, with Richard's input and in terms of his work, and he's looked at particularly on the news operation, we will issue in the next few weeks some clearer social media rules and guidelines. I think the bar will be higher for news and current affairs, but there will also be a bar for those people working as BBC talent across the organisation, across genre. Yeah, so Richard's work will absolutely inform and be, the underpinnings of that work as we publish that over the next few weeks.
Richard's work will inform, but will Richard's work be published? Will we be able to see exactly what he's saying? He's frozen, hasn't he?
I've got trouble with my internet connection now.
Yeah, we can hear you, Tim. Just can't see you move.
Can you hear me? So I'm theoretically in a safe space of New Broadcasting House, so I should hold up.
Well,
but anyway,
the internet is no better here in the Palace of Westminster. But anyway, look, just to close on this, we've sort of got new BBC boss to lay down the law on social media. We've then got the Telegraph reporting that certain stars are going to be exempt from this. Is he there? Are you there, Tim? No, he has gone completely now. He's going to redial.
I'm going to just turn my video off, so hopefully I can hear a bit.
There you go. We can hear you. You can hear us now, can't you?
can perfectly. Thank you. I'll go back to video in a minute.
So we got a crackdown. We've then got Richard doing this work. We've got the Telegraph saying that certain stars are going to be exempt from it, and and Gary sort of sneering a bit at your work. I just sort of wonder, it's not the most decisive first battle on impartiality, is it? Oh, we lost a lot.
Do you want to suspend? Mr. Davie? We'll suspend the session for while we just re-establish our connection. Order, order.
They all went, didn't they?
Yeah.
The whole BBC lot.
No. Claire's still there.
Oh yeah, Claire.
Claire, can you hear us?
Claire, can you hear us?
Maybe
No.
we might be muted. We're off. Right.
We're off as well, yeah.
That's never happened though. In all the time we've done this, that hasn't happened, has it?
David.
Order, order. Session's resuming. Steve Brine.
Yes. Hello. Mr. Davie, are you back with us? He's free.
Yeah, I'm hopefully back with you. This seems a bit shaky, but let's give it a go. Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
Well,
I can't see anyone.
My advice: stay on audio, Tim, and come off video.
No, I can't hear. Okay, thank you.
Video killed the radio.
Okay.
Okay, Tim.
Yeah, I can hear you. Let's give it a go.
Okay, good. Look,
think
I mean,
I'm going
look, just to conclude what we were saying, because of our millions of viewers who were hanging on the answer to that question, that devastating question I was asking you about, the big crackdown on social media, and then your Richard Sambrook review and the Telegraph reporting that certain stars will be exempt from it. I was just my point I put to you, my thesis is, Tim, that it wasn't the most decisive start into tackling the impartiality battle.
Yeah, I think I've been. I think we've been very clear, and I'm judges by what's out there on social media and our actions against it over time. That's all I can say. I know a lot of people will be speculating, but we'll make it clear through our social media guidelines and be judged by our actions.
All right, well, a lot of people will, because a lot of people follow your stars on social media. Just talk about younger audiences then. So you only mentioned younger audiences once, I think, in your speech. So has that sort of core priority of attracting younger audiences been downgraded? I noticed James Purnell, obviously formerly of this parish, who leads on this work, has been taken off the executive committee, and I just wonder what we should make of this.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'll come to the last point. The executive committee, all of them were focused on younger audiences, and it remains a priority for the BBC. But I did want to set it in the context. It's a good observation, because I did want to set it in the context of what I think is a broader challenge, which is a couple of things actually. When people move to an IP-enabled household, and suddenly you've got infinite choice, I think at that point the world gets much more competitive for organisations like the BBC, who have benefited from more fixed distribution models. So I absolutely think the priority is underserved audiences in the round, of which young audiences are utterly critical, tend to be, as we all know, more developed in terms of their media choices around on-demand, different platforms, gaming. So there's absolutely no doubt about it that in the umbrella of underserved audiences, I absolutely see young audiences as a priority. I would say one thing though, which is I do think the BBC, if you like, desperately trying to become, if you like, trying to grab young audiences, as opposed to doing landmark, brilliant program. I mean, one of the programs that I made in studios, Blue Planet, some of those big natural history landmarks, they've got massive youth audiences, but they have a 90-year-old presenter who happens to be have unbelievable curiosity, real energy. So it's not just about making youth output. It's also about making sure that what we choose on the news, how we develop our natural history offer, what comedy offer is actually relevant and based on things that people of all ages can engage with.
Yeah.
But no, youth remains a priority, but just within the context of the overall challenge.
But you're producers of great content, aren't you? And our inquiry of
yes.
Obviously, which this will inform around public service broadcasters. You're providers of great content, and that includes things like podcasts. So the Peter Crouch podcast has been phenomenally successful, and in attracting younger audiences, and it is a brilliant listen, if I may say so. But what about other stuff like? Do you know what the podcast called The Cut is, Tim?
I haven't listened to it.
Okay, well, it's been cut. It's a golf podcast. Golf is one of those sports that's going absolutely great guns since lockdown. It's outside, perfectly naturally socially distanced sport. I declare my interest, having previously worked in the business, but I certainly don't anymore. And that podcast, I know, had over 900,000 downloads in the year that it was on air, and it's disappeared. It's gone from the BBC portfolio, and I think that's one of those, yes, niche. But it's one of those things that attracts those younger audiences, which is very much the demographic of that game these days. And I just wonder what your view is on podcasts like that, like Peter Crouch podcast, which is surely a route to some of those younger audiences that you want.
Okay. Totally. And actually, I think if you look at the success of BBC Sounds, the way we've developed our podcasts, I think it's been truly exceptional, actually, and it's essential to us keeping relevant. I do think, and by the way, I'm not a golfer, that's why the cut hasn't reached me yet, but I do think there is a question, if I can be honest about it, kind of more in terms of that it's not just about how many people it reaches, it's also the level of distinctiveness. Is it unmistakably BBC? And we have limited resources, and I said one of the things we haven't touched on in the morning so far is that I do think the BBC has, in its attempt to deliver universality, somewhat understandably spread itself too thin. You can keep doing more and more podcasts, more and more web articles, and at the end of the day, you can justify, and we don't make a lot of, frankly, much that isn't of outstanding quality and has audiences that like it. The issue is, in my job, is to make the choices which says not only is something of public value and it's well liked, but is it the best use of our limited resources as we face up to people with 100 billion? So my question would not be, I don't know the ins and outs of this, but the challenge I've put to everyone, and James Pennell remains running brilliantly the audio arm of the BBC, is could we do slightly less but make sure we've got the budget to compete? So that means doubling down on things like the Peter Crouch podcast, which is working.
Yeah, okay. Then just finally, because you talked about resources, I'm amazed we've taken this long. Okay, we've had some technical breaks. But what do you know about Zoe Ball that we don't? The annual report that I've got here in front of me shows her salary. I mean, it stands out like a sore thumb in the list of presenters on radio, including the Radio 1 breakfast show presenter. Annual report shows her salary of £1.36 million for just the breakfast shows, circa 210 editions of the Zoe Ball breakfast show. That, despite losing 1 million listeners, 9.1 to 8.1, since she took over from Chris Evans. So Ken Bruce, who follows her, is paid $385,000. He's reportedly got 8.27 million listeners. So Zoe is paid more than the next 3 presenters who follow her put together. What do you know about Zoe Ball that we're all missing?
Well, I think the point here is, I mean, if I can, if you allow me just to say quickly on the overall topic of talent pay, I mean, you would expect me to say this, but we've got 28,000 people who appear on our screens and airwaves.
They're not all paid £1.3 million, are they?
Of course not. In fact, only one of them is, or 2 if we take, so that's 2 out of 28,000. Mm-hmm. We've got 70, that's really my point, 76 people on the list, and we are seeing, the overall kind of list being managed down, I think, in the right way. The point here is, and this is uncomfortable territory, but we've always had, in the realm of entertainment, a couple of areas where we are, without doubt, and I understand this, but look at the NAO report on the market for talent and what we pay. It's very uncomfortable territory, but the truth is, in a couple of spots, and that is high-end TV entertainment and the main breakfast show of Radio 2, we've always been in the market, and go to Google and have a look at some of the speculated prices on other networks that people are paying, that we pay serious money. Now, on the listening figures, I understand the point, but the truth is that this is still 0.1 pence per listener hour. I still think Zoe, as an exceptional broadcaster, offers value. Having said all that, and you're seeing the negotiation we've done with Gary Lineker, I think we are renegotiating contracts, and we and myself want to get good value for you as a licence fee payer.
Well, so, maybe his 400k went to top up Zoe. I just don't get it, Tim. I mean, that stands out in the list in your annual report. I mean, it's like a flashing light. And she's lost 1 million listeners. I mean, she must have the best agent in the business. I want to know who that agent is.
Well, if you look at the historical rate for the Radio 2 breakfast show and the talent we attract, which is essentially people who are looking at entertainment options across television and radio and internationally, and it does put them in a slightly different category, then we always get to a point where we're in the top 2 or 3 people being paid for by the BBC. But don't get me wrong, I mean, I think even, I think there are clearly, and I've inherited some of this, you've seen what we've done with Gary. I want to make sure that we are getting better, as best value we can in the market and better value where we can. So I understand it. I mean, I would say, by the way, that some of the commentary on this, if I may, if we got everyone down to 150,000, that would save the BBC 10 million. The over 75s cost us 700 million. Now, on that 10 million, we need to keep doing our work. I take the point. But on that 10 million, that accounts for 40% of our viewing and listening. And if you look at myself as I spent a lot of my last few years working in the international market, fighting for talent, there is an element of hyperinflation around here as all these services pile in, and people with TV personality and profile will be difficult to get. I'm all for developing young talent. I'm all for taking more risk or opportunity, we might call it, with younger talent coming through, or developing talent, I should say. But I absolutely think that we're going to have few people, and it is really a very small number of people where we're in a bit of a market. With Zoe in particular, she's an outstanding broadcaster. We are in a renegotiation, and we're looking at where we go forward.
All right. Well, all I would say is, if you want to bring on new talent, she's a good broadcaster, but she has many other gigs. She does the Strictly show. If you want to bring on other people, maybe you should spread the love around a little bit more, because when we come on to talk about regional broadcasting later, which my colleague Julie Elliott will, there are plenty of people out in the regions who would love to see a tiny slice of that money go to save huge parts of regional broadcasting. And I just would ask you to take that on board, Tim. And back to the chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll come to regional because I would like to talk.
Yeah, we will.
Kevin Brennan.
Sorry, just one quick follow-up on what Steve Brian was saying about podcasts and BBC Sounds. We hear the BBC Sounds is to be investigated by Ofcom for being too successful at attracting new audiences.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that?
It's absolutely appropriate. The regulator can have a look at Sounds. I think I'm confident. I mean, personally, having spent a lot of time with the radio industry, I would say more generally, by the way, I'm not interested in any version of events where the BBC is not an accretive force for the creative industries. I absolutely think we should be growing. The creative industry is an incredible success story for the country. It was growing at 3 times the speed as we went into COVID, and I think it can create jobs coming out of it. There's a lot of work done. I mean, I'm close to Global, to Bauer. There's been a lot of work done in terms of the BBC when I was director of radio, supporting DAB and adding competition. I've always said the BBC is all about the time spent and its impact in the market, not about just winning share.
But they're the ones who are complaining, of course. But I won't press you any further because I know we need to move on.
I'm happy for them to have a look, and I would look at it in the context of Spotify, all the other audio market, and I hope that we can have a really constructive relationship with Bauer and Global going forward as well, because they're great companies.
Right, thank you. Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. And welcome, Tim, to your first appearance at Select Committee, and everyone else who hasn't really had a chance to comment yet. I really loved the Zoe Ball show, and I believe she was paid a lot less than the previous presenter. Just want to say that. Before I go on to the regional stuff, I just want to clarify something you said in response to the Chair's questions. You said something, and I'm paraphrasing along the lines, that the audience might not be concerned about contractual status. That alarms me a little. The law is very concerned about contractual status, and although I welcome that you're looking at doing social media guidelines, that won't be retrospective, will it?
No, it won't.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
There's only so much I can take.
Yes.
But yeah,
I just wanted to clarify that because
it will not be retrospective, and not for the minute was I suggesting that. I mean, that's a whole load of another topic, which is the right support of freelancers, contractors. That was not my point.
Yeah.
It was simply when we're all sitting at the end of a long day on the sofa and someone's presenting at us, the contractual status of that individual is not of an overriding concern. Yeah. That was simply
it's just I thought I was fairly sure that is what you meant, but it didn't come across like that, so I wanted to clarify it.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
So,
thank you.
As has been said, I want to focus on regional broadcasting. Before I go into my questions, I would like you to chase up a letter that I wrote as chair of the Northern Group of Labour MPs to the previous Director General on this subject on the 11th of June, and you as designate Director General and Helen Thomas were copied into that, and I've never had a response on behalf of me and my colleagues. If you could
right, I'll check that, Julie.
chase that, because it is relevant to what I'm asking.
Of course.
So you said in your first address to staff that people must feel their BBC is here for them. It's an obligation to make all parts of the UK feel it is their BBC. In the annual report, you've said we know audiences want local content that speaks to them directly about their day-to-day lives and what matters to their communities. Our local and nation services need to be truly relevant to audiences in each place. So they are, very good words. But in the north at the moment, you are suggesting that you're cutting back on the very things that successfully deliver that. How is that being truly relevant to an audience in each place?
Well, I stand by my statement, Julie, in terms of I think the BBC's local and regional footprint is a critical part of our future and very important to us. And actually, it's an area where I would hope we see growth and investment as we go through the 22 settlement and beyond. Having said that, and I think you probably know where I'm going here, I do think that every area of the BBC, it's utterly appropriate to, and not contradictory to be able to say, look, I think this is incredibly important. We need to think about even how we invest money in the localities and the regions. But that does not mean we can't look for efficiency on delivering provision. And in terms of the proposals, and I looked at them with, quite seriously when I came in, the truth is, very simply, which is when it comes to local radio stations, when it comes to our TV news, when it comes to our political programming, we are maintaining our provision to audiences. Now, we're going to do it with slightly less people. There is going to be that sensitive debate, do we have 2 people presenting versus 1? And I've been involved in many of these debates over my career, but I'm totally focused on audience value. And I know, by the way, as I've said to many people, the hit TV show of the hour is the 6:30 news, by the way. It's the strongest programme we have in the UK. So we need to keep investing in that, supporting it.
But the news, can I just interrupt you there? Because the news, I think the news is a separate thing. What I'm talking about, we've had a big battle over the summer to keep regional Sunday politics programmes, which we've won. They've come in a slightly different format, but they're the same. But the investigative journalism programmes, like Inside Out, an award-winning programme, both regionally and nationally, is being got rid of, which to me, if you have an award-winning programme, I don't really understand how you're going to do that better than it is already done, particularly in not in my area, but in other areas where you've widened regions, and the regions you're talking about, sometimes there might be something in one part of the country that's 230, 240 miles from the other side of the region. That doesn't really have relevance to those 2 communities. So I'd like you to comment on that. How is that going to be improved?
Thank you. I was going to get there because that is the area where we've made a more substantive change in terms of what we're offering. And I think the point here is, look, Inside Out's got an amazing history. It's incredibly important to the BBC in terms of what it's done. But the idea that we can't evolve our current affairs, and I want to see bigger audiences, by the way. If you look at the audience numbers, actually for some of that reporting, it deserves a wider audience. My view is actually that there is a very strong case for moving from 11 hubs to 6 hubs. If you're a young journalist coming through, by the way, I think the idea of going to a slightly bigger hub, and the idea, I've got the point, but the idea that someone in Bristol can't go to Liskeard or Penzance and do that reporting, I think it doesn't stack up. I think
you've missed my point. I'm not talking about the report. The reporters can go wherever, but the audience, 240 miles away from Sunderland, is probably, just north of Watford Gap. The relevance of a local story around that area, although very important to people who live there, has no relevance really to me in Sunderland. So that's the point about the wider regions, that if you're talking about local and regional relevance, then there's a limit to how far regional identities go, and they certainly don't go 240 miles.
I've got the concern, and we've got to watch it carefully. But the idea that for the Bristol hub is not to bring current affairs and investigative reporting from Bristol, and not to be more relevant to Bristol audiences rather than St Austell audiences. It's where they're based as an office, the actual patch. And I actually think there is a case, for what it's worth, there is a case for concentrating our current affairs resources on slightly less hours to get more audience, bigger investigations. If it's any comfort, Julie,
it's slightly less. You're going down from 60 hours to 60 hours from 110 hours. That's a little bit more than slightly less, I think.
But the issue is, the issue for me is, what's the most important thing here? The most important thing is to get landmark current affairs journalism and have the resources to do programmes. If you look at the average
Can I just interrupt again on what you've said there?
What?
All the journalists are being made redundant, all of the investigative journalists, and they're going to be replaced by content producers. So how
Right.
are content producers? They're not investigative journalists. They're all being got rid of. So how does that tally?
I'll put in the note, we are certainly not getting rid of all investigative reporting resources, and they're not just sitting as producers. One thing I am interested in, Julie, is potentially, I'm considering now whether we could make more. I mean, we have an investigative reporting fund that could be drawn down to give these hubs more impact. So watch this space. I want to make sure these 6 regional hubs have enough resources. I think, if I'm blunt, I think it is the area of the plan where I want to keep looking at to make sure. I do not want to see a step backwards on the number of people getting and seeing current affairs from the BBC. And by the way, I don't apologise for rebranding Inside Out, generating these 6 powerful, 6 powerful hubs. I think we should do that, and I think there's areas like, Birmingham, where we go, okay, that's going to be a strong Midlands hub. I do think it's a fair question. It's one I am asking, I'll put it that way, about making sure those teams have enough financial resources to go after the story. And that is something I am reviewing.
Well, I very much welcome that. And did I take from what you've said, you're looking at having investigative journalism capacity within those hubs? Which at the moment,
Absolutely.
The jobs on offer are content producers.
What I'm going to do is I want to come back and just confirm the shape of the hubs to you, because I think, and we'll do that as part of, finally, apologies, replying to that letter, which we should always reply in good time. So I will make sure we do that.
I mean, the letter does not ask about that because the plans of this were not published at that point. But there we go.
But,
okay.
All right. Well, we'll get, whatever the right mechanism is, I'll get that back to you.
You're right to me. Thank you.
Could you actually write to the committee?
Of course.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we'll just on
you.
that question. Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Tim, I wonder if you could give us a breakdown of exactly where the 900 job cuts are going to fall across the regions.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, in terms of the regional split, I'm not sure I've got. I mean, this is not the 450. It's 450 within England.
Right.
Yeah. And then 450 in news. In the central news operation as we move to restructure that unit. In terms of exactly jobs by Birmingham, by everything else, sorry, someone's got it. I think, I'm not sure I've got, I haven't got the numbers by local radio office in front of me. Do you know what I mean? Like Berkshire, but it's 450 in England, it's 450 in news.
Right, okay. Well, it's been reported, and I'm aware that 60 jobs will be lost at BBC Cymru in Wales by spring next year as part of the effort to make the £4.5 million saving across Wales. Now, these jobs amount to approximately 6% of the workforce. Now, you have said they want the work of the BBC to be more focused outside of the South East. So how does that square with regional job cuts?
Well, we'll always, I mean, I think this is where I do want to move the dialogue a little bit, which is, I absolutely think that in my regime, it's all about the audience impact and making sure that, and as you know, I went up to Central Square. I think we've got incredible provision there, the investment we're putting in. I've also been championing, and by the way, we always look at the head count, but actually in Wales, that story of Rothlock, of Casualty, of Doctor Who, all those things we've invested in the infrastructure for Wales. So it's not just our news head count or our fixed headcount, it's also how many productions we're putting into Wales and how we're driving that creative economy. And by the way, those plans should be seen in the round. Studios, for what it's worth, as a growing commercial business, continues to invest in regions. We're just hiring over 100 people in the natural history unit, I think will be the number. We're working on it now in terms of so it's how we build our business, not only beyond the newsroom. But the but is, I do think it's appropriate that we look for efficiencies. I mean, we can't have it both ways. People are walking around going, we've got too much duplication in the BBC. Sometimes we have too many people against one task. I think it's actually appropriate that I look for those efficiencies across the BBC. And we're not going to be judged solely by our headcount number. We're going to be judged by our impact and audiences. And the good news, of course, is that the Welsh public, the numbers in Wales are good. I don't take that for granted, by the way. We've got a lot of work to do. I take your point. We are concerned about these things. We look at them. It's very sensitive work. But the idea that one area is utterly protected and can never, have an adjustment in headcount, I think is not the right way to look at it. It's all about what provision we give to the Welsh public. And I think that's what, and to be fair to us, if you look at Central Square, you look at our developments in Wales, it's not as if we're not committed to the nation. And I'm really, really supportive of that. I think we could go further. And that, by the way, don't get me started on how it could be a creative hub for Wales. And I've already started talking about things we could do. So it's not just about fixed BBC headcount. And I think we've got to move on from that, because otherwise it's going to be difficult. Because I've said I want the BBC to be smaller in fixed headcount. I think we've got too many people in certain places.
Okay. Well, on that, I mean, I've been to Central Square. I've had a tour of the facilities. It's absolutely, it is fantastic, and I too would love to see it become this creative hub for Wales and for the wider region as well. But then on that, do you think that the BBC should be doing more to invigorate regional media at a time when other broadcasters and streamers such as Sky and Netflix have centred their commercial investment in the southeast?
Yeah. In a word, yeah. I actually think we've done a lot. But I think, the chair's challenge on the Midlands is a good one. I've talked to Stephen Knight, who's looking at a development in Birmingham. I think there's all kinds of things we could be doing. Now, again, it's difficult this, because I think the BBC's got a record second to none. I mean, as I go around the world, by the way, looking at other broadcasters, let's be realistic in terms of the US players, they are moving to centralisation to get maximum efficiency. Yeah, so they're centralising everything. I mean, that's the trend in media, because the inflationary costs on talent, on everything's being centralised. I think the BBC needs to move against that, because actually it's a massive advantage. I've said very publicly, I like Netflix. I'm not trying to beat Netflix. I'm trying to do something different. And one of the things we will do differently is we'll be more connected into communities. And that means working with Wales, working with S4C. I mean, absolutely, we should be doing more of that. That's what we're there for.
And great to hear that. But how do you actually plan on doing that? What do you think the BBC needs to do to engage in partnerships across the UK, across the regions and the nations?
Well, I think there's a number of levers, and having done a lot of work on the creative industries, I think there's the levers are, I think, largely one of them is attracting first-class talent and production talent, working in partnership with local authorities and governments, and making that money work together. The second is things like talent and training. So currently 2.4% of the workforce of the BBC is apprenticeships and apprentices. Could we do more of that? Could we make sure that someone in Wales who's got that potential is actually being hired and developed? These are things, I think, bluntly, that we'll need to talk about in the 22 settlement, where we can do, I think, a lot more locally and regionally. I mean, we're strapped on our resources at the moment, but I think there's more we could do. But it's about attracting talent. It's about partnership with local leaders, local politicians, mayors, all the various bodies out there. And that's what we need to do. And you do get growth that way, by the way. The other thing is we obviously spend a lot of the license fee out with small independent companies. And that's an important metric for us, because more and more of this market is being centralized to what I would call, sorry for the jargon, vertically integrated businesses. So more and more companies are buying production because they're worried about where their supply is coming from. So you end up with a much more kind of fenced off market. The BBC, and this is attractive for us creatively and editorially, should be out there with the two people setting up an indie in Wales and working with them. Absolutely, we should be doing that. That's what we've got to keep that supply pipe working for us.
Okay. I'd also like to touch on news broadcasting, if I may, and regional news. How successful has the BBC's local news partnership scheme been in supporting local news reporting?
I have to say, I mean, I've been so kind of chuffed with this, because I didn't know how it was going to work. Yeah, and actually, I mean, if you look at the scheme, 150 local democracy reporters now in place. It's costing $8 million a year with the partnership, but actually, the numbers are really exceptional. 1,500 stories per week. We've got 140 member companies in the partnership now. So that's working very well. And more than 900 outlets are provided with. So we're supplying, that partnership's now supplying 900 outlets. So overall, we're pretty pleased. We're pretty pleased. I don't know whether you've got any concerns or thoughts. My ears are all open on that one. But overall, from what I've seen coming into the job, and I have my questions whether it would actually bite, because I worry sometimes about small initiatives, but over, breaking up the money and all that. But actually, it's working. Okay.
Good. Now, I'd like to ask something that's quite a personal bugbear of my own, if the chair will indulge me. The coronavirus pandemic has shone a spotlight on the major problem with nationwide news coverage, especially relating to the devolved nations. Now, on behalf of the people in Wales, it is extremely frustrating to repeatedly see news coverage saying things like, the Health Secretary has announced new guidelines. Now, this is causing great confusion for people across the country, across the nations, and it's vital that broadcasters respect and distinguish between the devolved nations' approach to the coronavirus. You've already committed to making the BBC representative of its viewership, and I really welcome this. But I rarely see Matt Hancock being described as the Health Secretary for England, which is ultimately what he is. Now, what specific steps are you taking to ensure that your coverage is fundamentally accurate?
It's a good point, because I think this pandemic has absolutely emphasised the need and challenges of reporting the nations properly. And I think there have been some moments where we've said, look, we've absolutely, by the way, how's it being handled? Through our we've got a very strong editorial grip of what we do. We've got our editorial standards group. We monitor these things, we look at them. And overall, I have to say, slightly defensively, I think we're doing a good job of constantly flagging different restrictions in different nations and different kind of rules. Also, we have the 630s, we've got the shows out there, so and the local radio services. Look, I take your point. It's a watching brief. I think we're doing pretty well, but I think it's a watching brief, and I note your personal bugbear.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. No more from me.
Thank you. Philip Davis.
Hi, Philip.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I come back to impartiality, if I may? Mr. Davie, you sort of started off well by saying, you were going to have a big thing on impartiality, and we were going to stop all of this, make people in areas of the country that felt a bit left out, we were going to make sure that they felt represented by the BBC, this kind of stuff. And then when the sort of chairman put to you the obvious point that, the biggest evidence of this was the metropolitan view of Brexit being forced upon people in the northeast, and you sort of shied away from admitting that there have been any problems at all. So you basically, it seems to me, that you're bringing forward to a solution to a problem that you don't think exists, which is slightly bizarre. So I just want to press you a bit further on the whole Brexit thing. Can you give me one example? Just one will do. We've had 4.5 years or so since the referendum. Can you give me one example of a BBC programme that has explored the opportunities that Brexit brings?
I've listened to numerous things on Radio 4 that's looked back and forth in both sides fully, Philip. I mean, I can't remember the titles of the programmes and the more or lesses, but there's plenty of analysis across the BBC looking at the pros and cons, the debates. I mean, I just don't recognise that in terms of, I mean, you may have, I know people have views on overall perspective of the BBC, but I mean, I can definitely send you a list. I'm quite happy to share a list of programming where the debate's been full, flavoursome, voices across the political spectrum. I honestly don't think that has been the big issue. And I know you're saying, sorry, I know you're saying I'm sidestepping the question. I'm not sidestepping the question. I'm saying the issue around impartiality is largely about people not seeing their own views, voices represented outside the metropolitan. That's a related but separate point.
So let me give you an example from today. Katja Adler, today. This is her report. This is what she said. I've got a transcript of it here for you. The EU enters the last scheduled round of negotiations, hopeful but wary. It says on technical issues there's been a lot of progress, but the political compromises must now be swiftly found on the main persistent sticking points government subsidies fishing rights and what kind of dispute mechanism the deal should contain. This is the week the EU says the UK must show if it's serious about a deal and it will soften some of its red lines to get there. Brussels says negotiators could then enter a media blackout tunnel to try to crash out a final bilateral compromise. The current Brussels guesstimate is a deal could be struck by the beginning or end of mid-November, full stop. That's 6 or 7 sentences of Brussels says, as far as I can see. Not one mention of what the UK government's position is at all. Is that what you consider? I mean, there's no wonder that the BBC is called the
Philip,
Brussels
please,
Broadcasting Corporation.
Allow me a little bit. I mean, if you look at Katia, I mean, if you read 7 lines, Philip, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I've got... No, but if you go through the articles, Katia sent me a brilliant analysis that very clearly outlined, I'll send you the blog, it outlined very clearly the government's position. It outlined the European position. There's absolutely, I mean, I think we've got an outstanding journalist there who actually laying out the European position there's no endorsement of the European position there at all that I read.
So who at the BBC, so that's her job then. So whose job at the BBC is it to unquestionably just trot out what the government's position is without any balance whatsoever? Which person's job is that? Because I haven't noticed that particular
No, but Philip, she's the European editor. She's given
who's the UK government editor that just trots out the government's position?
She's not the EU Parliament's editor. She's the EU editor, and appropriately laying out that. But if you read Katia's post, by the way, read the whole thing. I mean, please.
I've read the whole thing. I've read it out.
There's so much debate on the BBC. I mean, I can stack it up. Now, my worry, by the way...
That's fine.
No, but hold on. I have a worry about this. Because I'm serious about it, because I worry that we focus on the wrong thing for the health of the BBC, which is I have genuinely... And by the way, I take the challenge. By the way, I've been 4 weeks in the job, so I've got a bit of work to do, Philip. I agree with you. I have said there are plenty of areas where we need to reach out, connect to... And this is true of all institutions, reach out to people who feel that the metropolitan media elite do not represent their view. The BBC I'm not self-flagellating here, because the BBC has got a better record of that. If you listen to the 6:30 shows, the idea that we didn't connect with people around the country, 29 local radio stations, and finally, there's no one's job in the BBC, to be clear, to directly answer, which is to toe the government's line. Everyone's job is to represent impartially the situation across all the lines. That's our job.
So what is it that what are these metropolitan views that people out in the sticks, so to speak, feel so sidelined about if Brexit is absolutely not one of them?
There might be areas, but there might be all kinds of areas like rural affairs, economic, social mobility, concerns around housing, all those kind of issues that are reflected differently. I mean, you and I know that when you travel a long way outside cities, the UK feels a very different place. The BBC is in a good position on this. 91% of people do 18 hours a week. But what I have signalled is not, unfortunately, and I know this would help, this would fit a narrative, but it's not the case. What I'm saying is there is a danger there in terms of the way the UK is developing. People are more partial. They want to hear their own view. And I want to balance the BBC. It's important to this institution and the creative industries. I care about it. And we're not going to be that. It's not about simply kind of vocalizing one particular point of view or the other. It's about going out and representing the debate. And I'm all, by the way, for hearing where we don't get it right, because it's going to be it's an art, not a science. As editor-in-chief, I take responsibility for that. And by the way, we should look at any editor. If you sat with any of our editors and sit with Katia and talk to her properly about trying to get impartial reporting in terms of how the EU works, I think we've got the best in the world. Best in the world. That's not to say we're not listening.
Well, actually, I'm quite charitable to the BBC. I don't think you deliberately set out to be partial, and I genuinely don't. I mean, I don't think anybody goes to the BBC each morning and thinks, right, how can we present a biased case? I genuinely don't think that. I think the problem is that what you do is you recruit from a very small pool of people, a sort of North London metropolitan group of people who all think the same, and so they don't think they're being sort of. They just think
Philip, as a proud Croydon,
everybody thinks that they do.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
As a proud Croydon boy, I don't think I've ever been so insulted. But anyway, I think the point is, I made it perfectly clear that I do think that if you get diverse groups of people, forgive the jargon, but with different lived experiences, and you look at the way Britain is changing, you are very vulnerable if you don't have a wide diversity of views. I agree with you. And I've said, and even though I would defend our current performance, I do think there is absolutely a challenge to make sure that modern institutions, and we're all part of them, are recruiting from a broad base of talent, diverse talent, and that means people from every region, different mindsets. And I do worry sometimes that there is a BBC type or a certain way of thinking. And even if you're trying and doing relatively well at delivering impartiality, you can keep improving by making sure that you recruit in that way. And that's what I was at.
Well,
So
I mean, a BBC journalist in a newsroom told me that there's 2 or 3 of them vote Conservative, and they wouldn't dare ever announce that to anybody in the office because they thought that they would probably be edged out of their jobs if they did.
Philip,
there was no problem at all. But there was no problem at all of people proudly boasting how sort of left wing they are in the office. That was absolutely fine. That's the kind of culture that there is at the BBC. That's what the staff tell me, that is the culture at the BBC, and that's what you need to tackle.
But when you say the staff, that is not the, you'll always get 20,000 people. You'll always get some views. I mentioned with I look with a wry smile at the number of BBC staff who have gone on to work for your good party. Yeah, there's plenty of them. There's a load more than a handful. Yeah, so there's plenty out there. The issue is you leave your politics at the door. People were quite surprised that I'd had a deep political past. They couldn't believe it. So I just don't think it stacks up. I think we're better than the cliche, Philip, and come to the newsroom and have a walk around. We're better than that. Now, the issue is not that. It's about, I sound like I'm just pushing back. I think your point about recruiting a diverse group of people where there's no groupthink, is something I think is a risk going forward. And it's going to get greater as Britain gets more diverse and potentially more divided. Actually, the BBC as a force where we can bring these debates together and have a mature, proper debate of the issues is actually something that excites me. We should be supporting that.
So, David, can I just ask you a quick question? Because, of course, Tim Davie's got a good excuse. He's only just taken over the job. I mean, he says give him a chance and all the rest of it. The chairman read out some tweets from Gary Lineker earlier, and the Director General said, he was going to clamp down on that kind of behaviour. Fair enough. We can see what he does. You've been there for 3.5 years, Sata. You said at the start that impartiality starts at the top. You were the one who said that in your earlier uttering. So it begs the question: what on earth have you been doing as the chairman of the BBC to allow people like Gary Lineker to flaunt his left-wing political views across everywhere while you've been chairman of the BBC? It seems that you've been asleep at the wheel.
Mr. Davis, clearly incorrect. Actually, if you look at our trust scores of the last year or two, they've gone up. Please read the actual annual report, which you're supposed to be holding us to account for. On page 21, it shows very clearly the news you trust the most. The BBC's score has gone up from 51 to 62%. And the next person is Sky News at 8, ITV at 5, The Guardian at 3, and other papers can't even register. The next key issue, look again at page 21. If you want accurate news coverage, the BBC has gone up in the last 12 months from 53% to 62%. That's a very significant move. You've got to look at the stats. You can't rely on talking to individual people in an organization of 20,000 people. If you look at the actual stats, we've done well. My experience, by the way, over the last 3 or 4 years is, and I receive a huge number of complaints, they're almost always of the same type. They're from people with very, very strong views, and they almost always say, I don't hear my view often enough, and I hear the view of my opponent too often. On the Brexit debate, on the left-right debate, I get a colossal number of letters, and they're always the same. I don't hear my view often enough, irrespective of what they are. I think actually the BBC, I arrived after the Brexit referendum, but on the Brexit debate, which continued, I used to keep on my desk 2 letters from 2 eminent peers. The one said, you're so pro-remaining, I can't get over it. And the second said, you're so assuming that Brexit will happen, you don't take the second referendum seriously. They were both from people with very strong views. I think the majority of people recognise, and the stats show, that we are the most trusted news source. And I repeat, please look at the stats. Please look at the annual report. In the last 12 months, our scores have gone up very, very significantly.
Well, it's a wonderful answer. Unfortunately, it suffers from the disadvantage of not addressing the question that I actually asked. And the question I actually asked...
Well, you suddenly asked me what have I been up to in the last few years, and I've told you the scores have gone up, but you want to ignore the evidence. You want to ignore the evidence. You rely on individual anecdotes from individual people, and you yourself, as we know, are a complainant to Ofcom. You ran a long, long complaint to Ofcom, which they found against. I mean, I've got the quote from Ofcom as to what they said about your complaint. They said it had no merit. And
well,
last year, if you look at 2019, look at what they said in 2019 when they wrote about us. Despite an uncertain political environment, this is Ofcom, our regulator. The BBC remains the UK's primary source for news and has maintained its reputation for trusted and accurate reporting. That's what Ofcom said. Who else do you want me to satisfy? You clearly want me to satisfy you, and that is extremely difficult.
So, David, I think I don't know if you've got a wasp down your trousers or something. I think you need to calm yourself down a minute. I mean, it's no surprise that the sort of Metropolitan Remain virtue signalling left-wing politically correct Ofcom that's marking the big city metropolitan left-wing virtue signalling BBC think that they're doing a fine job. That's that we take that as read. But if you could just address the question I actually asked, which would be helpful. It's for me to ask you the question, not for you to ask yourself a question. The question I asked is, Gary Lineker's tweets that the chairman read out at the start, which were done when you were the chairman, I'm putting it to you that you either think those tweets were absolutely fine, or what did you do about it if you didn't think they were
know
fine?
very well, Mr. Davis, you know perfectly well that the editor-in-chief who deals with individual talent work or individual tweets is the Director General. The role of the board is general oversight, which is why I quoted you the oversight figures.
And so
you cannot ask me about individual people who are a matter for the Director General. You know that perfectly well.
So you've never said to the Director General at the time, you know, look at these tweets here. Do you not think there's something we should be doing something about this? That's what I call oversight, Sir David. I don't know what you call oversight. Maybe having a bottle of wine for lunch or something might be your oversight. But my oversight is actually saying, do you really think that this is appropriate? That's what I call oversight.
Of course, informally and privately, I talk to the Director General pretty much on a daily basis about most of the hot issues. Nevertheless, I'm always very careful that my role is not directly to interfere with individual editorial decisions. That is a matter for the chief. My job is general oversight, which is, again, if you want to ask me, you cannot ask about individuals. You've got to look at it overall. And I've told you what the stats are. You are very, very keen to ignore the statistics, the general statistics. And as to your question, you did ask me about Gary Lineker, but you also very pointedly asked me what I've been up to for the last 3 years. And I've just answered it.
Thank you, and thank you, Philip. We're going to take at the request of the BBC a short adjournment for 2 minutes. Order. Thank you. Order. Continuing our inquiry into the BBC's annual report on public service broadcasting, I call Damien Green.
Thank you. And morning, everybody. We talked a lot of sort of important micro issues. If I can move the session on to slightly more macro issues. Funding for a start. One of the things that I imagine you want to do is increase the BBC's commercial income. Tim, how are you going to do that?
Thank you. I think we've made a lot of progress with studios, and I think we can be very proud. You'll have seen the record numbers in the annual report, growing the revenues to 1.4 billion. So answering your question, I think there's a number of areas where I'm encouraged about the growth potential of the studios business. I think they come in a few areas. The first is, of course, the production business sitting on the studio side of the fence means we can now attract the talent and grow the business globally in terms of production. So obviously COVID gives you a headache on this, but actually I do think the opportunities across the world for the quality BBC production will continue to grow. There's inflation, which is another problem for public service, of course, but there is inflation and good pricing growth in terms of some of the drama, some of the major productions. So that's area one, simply put, which is doing more, growing our production business. And by the way, I did say in my speech, I think there's other areas of the BBC which you can begin to look at in terms of where we could go with that. Are there other areas we could deploy the model? I think the second is we are on the cusp. I mean, the BBC has done well and been successful commercially with a range of linear channels and selling third-party business, i.e. programs to Netflix around the world. I do think we're at a tipping point where the direct-to-consumer business now looks like a more realistic opportunity. We talk a lot about, and I get this a lot from Westminster and other places, just why don't you just launch the iPlayer globally? And I could go into some length, but that, I think as you know and others, getting the rights for those programs internationally, and also the fact that you don't generate a lot of money. Most of these SVOD services don't deliver a lot of cash in the short term. But I do believe, based on the success of BritBox in the US, and the fact that we can see premium news, BBC Audio, areas like that, where I think we're now at a point where we could grow subscription businesses around the world and join ourselves up to do that. So I think that's another area. So it's production, it's subscription businesses. And I probably actually stop there because there's a few other things I've got in my head, but they're the big ones.
Okay, and both of them give rise to interesting questions. The first one, area one, as you called it, making programs for a global audience and selling them. There's an obvious danger there that cuts across your license fee commitment. You are paid compulsorily by every household in this country to make programs for all of us in all parts of this country. If you are thinking, here's a good series, this'll sell in America, or this'll sell in India or China or something like that, there's an obvious tension there. How do you resolve that tension?
By clearly setting priorities. By the way, it is a tension, and I think it's something I've managed for the last few years. And there was real worries, actually, being open about it, with studios where we suddenly drift editorially and with projects disappear. But the truth is, BBC Studios, I feel very strongly about this, is part of the BBC group. And therefore it serves our primary objective, which is to make sure we deliver value to the licence fee payer. Under any construct, by the vast majority of revenue, and to your point, the joys of the licence fee is utterly the priority. So under my leadership, it's really clear that studios, the priority is to supply and ensure we have the right content with the right windowing in the UK. And that's an important point, by the way, which is what window, sorry for the jargon, but what bit of the content we have in the UK, 6 months, 12 months, or forever. But absolutely, look, it's a tension. I think there's absolute clarity that studios, first and foremost, has to deliver for the public service and make sure that on a programme like, as you may be aware, Blue Planet, or one of the big natural history landmarks, that is now 80% funded by overseas partners. But critically, and this is the critical point, critically it is editorially led by the BBC Public Service. So there's no danger of it going elsewhere or being shaped for another broadcaster. We may do little tweaks or this, that and the other. The final thing is everything we do at studios has to be in line with the BBC's editorial values. And absolutely, it's not about just spewing forth content that we wouldn't stand by.
And the other point you make the point about BritBox, and you make the point about iPlayer, and I've read reports that the jobs of the channel controllers are going. Are BBC One, BBC Two, BBC 3 and 4 as well sort of dying assets?
No, I think we're in a. And by the way, don't believe everything you read. It's just, but we will have. It's just about where. Yeah, there's clearly someone. I don't know about job titles, and Charlotte Moore, who's our excellent chief content officer, is looking at how the structure would work. But there's absolutely no doubt under any forecast, this is going to be a hybrid world for. Yeah, almost long term in terms of major channels and linear channels are going to deliver something. I suspect over the long term, you know, linear consumption will be down, so you may see a reduced number of linear channels, but certainly we're miles away from that. And when you see these big events and these big programs, and also it's really important that, you know, I talk about these 6:30, the Prime Ministerial broadcast, the other, 9 million people watching that. These things are still hugely important. So I can't see any forecast where linear, frankly, just wanes to a point of irrelevance. What I would say, though, and you're pushing an important question, which is what you can't do in this world is solely commission for a linear shape. Again, sorry for the kind of industry words, but if we are now, and Charlotte's job is to make sure that when we commission drama and we look at the drama offer across the BBC, it works for the iPlayer as well as it works for BBC One and BBC Two. Yeah, and that kind of almost equally weighted. You're looking across the front, and there are different things that work, in terms of episode length, number of eps on demand versus linear. And what I don't want to do, and cannot afford to do, and it's similar in news, is have a massive load of resources on iPlayer, a massive load of resources on channels, a massive load of resources on every silo. You've got to have a commissioning base that looks at content in the round and that value that we're talking to license fee payers.
But I imagine, sorry to interrupt, but I imagine in the past, there's sort of one of the things for the head of drama has always been, let's get one of those big Sunday night BBC One whole nation watching type of dramas. It sounds like that kind of thing isn't going to happen in the future. If you hit upon one because you've commissioned it, great, but is nobody looking at that anymore?
No, but we're lucky enough to have a bit of a balance. So you're absolutely right. The first thing is, if you take the whether it be normal people or us or the one that's just we're showing at the moment in terms of the drama, that's doing, I think it did 3 million or 3.2 million last episode on BBC One, but the iPlayer numbers in many cases are going above the linear. It may not be, and I think different dramas, this, are going to have different shapes. So A Suitable Boy or A Call the Midwife may have a very strong and proper showing, and we've got to keep serving that big audience for I remember it throughout my life, that kind of 8 o'clock Sunday drama, and that may well do the majority of its business through, linear. Although I have to say, even with those, in inverted commas, more, I was going to say traditional, but that would be damning them because I think some of them are brilliantly done, is even with those, we're seeing the number of people going to iPlayer is very, very significant now. And if you take something like Normal People or I May Destroy You, which is the more cutting edge drama, we see vast numbers in iPlayer, often exceeding what's on the linear. So look, we've got to balance these things. I think the days of a proper, serious piece of Sunday drama are still there, but they're part of a more sophisticated mix.
You talked about young audiences earlier on. Which audiences do you think are poorly served at the moment?
I think we've got, the first point is slightly defensively, I'd say, I don't think anyone, if you look at the overall averages, there's few audiences that are very poorly served or poorly served, because actually the base, 91% of people, 18 hours a week. So, and part of what I'm doing as a Director General is setting out future risks, not just talking about current burning issues. And that's obviously the game that's quite difficult to play here. But I do think, look, there's obvious bases. There's the young you've mentioned, which is the under 35s. There is that we don't deliver, and it's all from a pretty high threshold. So this isn't massive problems, but we do slightly under-index in certain geographic areas. We slightly under-index in C2DE. There are ways in which lower socio-economic groups. This is a little bit been always the case. But as you get a more competitive market, I think the chances of those audiences, and they're not at the moment, but the risks, and I've got to dimensionalise the risk because I care about this, is the risk that those audiences could fall away could be, is there. So I think they're the groups. Frankly, it's the groups that have always felt, somewhat slightly less, that has slightly less value from the BBC. It's all good value, but we've got to work on those.
And turning it round a bit, there's always been criticism of the BBC on impartiality. We've heard some of that where the right criticise you for being metropolitan liberals and the left criticise you for being establishment stooges. And as it were, that criticism is always there and is often invalid. But there is, it seems to me, a more valid long-term criticism, which is that the BBC has become imperial. And as soon as anyone has a good idea, you try and move into that area and quite often have the firepower to drive potential commercial rivals out of it. And as we get into a more mixed environment where, as you say, the difference between linear channels and content you produce that just goes online is blurred, that becomes ever more dangerous. Are there areas that you think the BBC shouldn't be in that it is in now?
No, I haven't got anything that I'd serve up immediately, but I think the overall, your point is one that we've got. We are subject to rigorous fair trading regulation, all the things. And for what it's worth, when I took over studios, I'll give you an example. I was very clear that some of our adventures in the past into travel guides, we disposed of various websites and bits and pieces that we thought were non-core. And I think part of my strategy is that 3.7 billion of revenue or 5 billion with the commercial revenues is a significant amount of money. But versus what we're looking at, it's ironic because we obviously look within the UK and we get somewhat obsessed by the UK market. But the scale of the competitors means that actually we've got to really focus. So I think there are, I have got no agenda in terms of pushing out scope in that way that isn't utterly distinctive. What my plea would be, we have a data-based argument on that. Because I think if you look at the performance of all, for instance, print media around the world, where the BBC exists or doesn't exist, some of these changes are being driven by bigger structural factors. One of the things that I think has worked particularly well, I talked about in my speech, is an enlightened blend between the BBC and commercial partners. I'm thrilled by the success of Sky in the UK and how that's developed. I think it's a fantastic business, well run. And if you look at the way that's grown over time, the BBC should be sitting alongside growing commercial businesses. It should be doing things differently and being differentiated. But I wouldn't want us to be fenced into a point where we cannot properly engage audiences inappropriately. So I just think the regulation is there. I don't think I'm after big scope extension. I think the biggest thing I've said finally is I do think sometimes we're doing too much, but I don't think it's necessarily we should be out of podcasts, but we should probably be thinking about how many we want to do, how we grow the market for podcasts, and also focus down on what's really working, like Peter Crouch.
Thank you.
Clive Efford.
Hi, Clive.
Hi. Well, welcome to your new role.
Thank you.
just following on from that, the BBC's performed incredibly well through COVID. I mean, a 40% increase in visits to iPlayer. I think it was 91% of the adults engaged with it in a week, and 84% visited it on the first day of lockdown. I think I've got those figures right.
We got up to 94, sorry, Clive, 94 during the COVID week.
I was doing you down. So
please.
So that was, I mean, that's remarkable. So what is it that's so unique? Look, when this, competition is increasing, exponentially in this field, what is it that's so unique about the BBC that people are so loyal to it?
I think our research says a couple of things. One is trust. We've had a long and extensive debate already this morning on the topic, and I kind of always I accept some of these challenges. So I can't stand it when the BBC is either complacent or too defensive. But the truth is, we are trusted by audiences, despite all the issues and the challenges. There is something about when people want a trusted source of information, they come to us, and we see that on a regular basis. I think the second thing is, frankly, I think we produce things well. I think actually we do a good news bulletin, and we've got very good presenters, very good staff. They know how to deliver this stuff, and audiences we are trusted. The other thing, finally. And I know the sensitivities around this, and I take them. I absolutely clock it. But our regional and our local provision is critical. I mean, remember that it's fascinating, isn't it? The 6:30 News is the biggest news program in the UK. Yeah, the 6 and the 10 are doing brilliantly, but that 6:30 News, and particularly now with what we're going through, these regional dimensions to the COVID crisis, people want a trusted source, and often that regional news and a local news can bring that in as well.
I know people criticise, the BBC licence fee, and with some justification, regressive form of tax and all the rest of it. But these things are seldom all bad. Is there something about ownership as well, that there's a sort of direct relationship?
I think there clearly is a sense that the BBC is a communal endeavour. And I should have mentioned it, this is slightly soft of me, so forgive me, but it's kind of important, which is I do think people in these type of crises want to come together and be connected. We saw huge audiences, by the way, for the VE75 commemorations. We've seen big audiences to charity night appeals, the big night in, where I think we're up to, I'll guess the figure, but about £70 million raised. These things where the BBC is a convener of the nation is really, really powerful to people, and it means something. I think in terms of we may well talk about the licence fee or not, but there is a sense of ownership. I would say one thing, which is one of my clear challenges to the staff and the BBC, though, is that while I am a robust defender of the BBC in terms of what it delivers in terms of creative industry growth, the values to our cultural life, we do need to make sure that every household is getting value. In other words, I think it is quite crunchy, that, which is you can it's not enough for you just to think the BBC is a good thing. You also need personally with your family to be getting exceptional value for the money the 40p a day. Yeah, so it's a balance for us.
And I mean, and it's been a centre for innovation for generations now, and you've been, commercially, you've been benefiting from that. The back catalogues you've sold, things like Doctor Who and all the rest of it. Is there a danger that in this new commercial BBC, where increasingly you're reliant on commercial income, that creativity and that innovation will be squeezed out, and the BBC will be no longer what it was?
I actually see the dangers. It's not there aren't jeopardy. I see the jeopardy slightly differently, actually, because I think there's jeopardy all over the place, Clive. But I think the first thing is, I think creatively and editorially, one of the things I said when I got to studios was we're not going to try and beat another company at their own game. The worst thing we could do is try and become a US network or we've got to become almost more BBC. I mean, the reason why we are loved is because we are different, differentiated, higher quality. I mean, the reason we are, we do so brilliantly commercially is we're very BBC in what we do. I think the commercial challenge and the balance is if you haven't got enough funding in the public service license fee, what you can't do in this world is buy enough, and this gets very technical, but in the UK, there is no doubt that I want to make sure that BBC content, is sitting for the license fee payer wherever we can. And in the UK, often we are dependent in this market because the pricing on stuff is going so aggressively up that you are selling a second window to Netflix and all of that. Now, it's some of what we talked about earlier about the commercial tensions. That is the tensest area for us, which is the balance between commercial revenue in the UK and the license fee delivery. All I would say is, in my mind, it's very clear what the priority is deliver you the best value possible for £157.50. That trumps any commercial ambition in the UK. We must deliver that.
Okay, so can I ask you then, just moving on a bit, was the BBC right to make the BBC Storyworks creation sponsored by Huawei last year?
I'm not close to it because I didn't manage. Storyworks is part of Global News Limited, but I think in terms of my judgment would be, because I think as studios we sold Huawei some programming, so my view is, as I understand it, as long as we're not involved technically, or there's no technical, and I know there wasn't in the dealings we've done with Huawei, as long as there's no technical infrastructure being involved, or we're not got technical risk, then my view is I can't see an issue why we wouldn't work in partnership with them as a Chinese media company.
Well, no, but wasn't the criticism that it was a sort of a whitewash of Huawei, that they had editorial control and the BBC were just used?
Well, I haven't seen the programme, but all I can do is talk in kind of generic terms, which is anything produced by Storyworks has to meet our editorial guidelines and the fair trading team. If there's a specific, I'm sure the team's been through it, but if there's a specific concern, we'll look at it. But Storyworks has clear editorial oversight. We absolutely should not be making puff pieces for anyone. We should be making content that fits with our editorial guidelines. So if we had any concerns on that, I'm all ears.
Yeah. Can I just turn to Sir David for briefly to ask, given that there are 900 redundancies coming up in the BBC, is it right to guarantee the new Director General a £50,000 increase by next August?
The position when we went out to look for the new Director General was to benchmark the role. We benchmarked it at 550. I mean, it's worth noting that is a fraction of what the opposite number who works for Sky or for ITV is paid, and actually considerably less than the other public service broadcaster, Channel 4. Why the DG of the BBC is paid less than the equivalent in Channel 4 for a much bigger job is one of those things that we could all comment on. But we benchmarked it at 550. That required almost all the candidates who applied for the job, including the one who was successful, to take a significant pay cut. We benchmarked that level. Once Tim had been chosen, I asked Tim if he thought it was appropriate that he should actually take the 550, given that Lord Hall was on 450, and we had agreed a pay freeze for a year. And Tim voluntarily, because I didn't insist on it, said that he was happy for a year to stay on the same level as Lord Hall. I think Tim has been very reasonable in that debate, and I think the level at which the salary is picked is fair. Actually, it represents a very significant discount to the market.
And has there been any reaction from staff when 900 people are facing redundancy? Has there been any comeback on that?
No, I would say that Tim has gone down, and his appointments have been very well received by staff.
Okay, all right. If I could just turn back to you, Tim, and just ask what's going to be your priorities going into the midterm review of the Charter? It's coming up in 2022. Are you looking towards that yet?
Of course, we're beginning the process begins in earnest, I think, imminently. I mean, without going through it all again, I mean, my priorities I think I've laid out really clearly, which is audience value. By the way, can I just say, I don't want to take a £25,000 pay rise, so it's 525. Not 550, just for the record. Just so you know. By the way, on the, just going back in terms of just give me the specifics of what you're after on that second one in terms of, because I could drone on about that. I'd rather. What's the specific concern as priorities? I mean, I've laid out very clearly, I think, audience value. And then, ensuring that everything I do is, and with the senior team, is simply trying to get you more value as a license fee payer from your license fee. And I think that's under threat. I said, I think we've got real jeopardy. You look at audiences, when an IP connection comes in the household, there's more competition. So what I'll be doing in 22 is making a clear, we'll be focused on our priorities. The other thing is, I do think that we all need to reflect on, everyone needs to reflect on the UK creative industries. I think we're under real pressure. Look, I'm someone who's been to many countries around the world and know how powerful the UK creative industries are. It's an industry. It's wonderfully an industry where scale is important, but unlike manufacturing and production, where scale can be more dominating as a factor, we as a nation can become an even better and world-beating. But it does require investment. And this is the great thing about the BBC, is the level of accountability, not only demonstrated by this committee today, but also the fact that audiences can look directly and feedback to us on whether they get value from that fee. My view is the BBC is worth investing in. And I think we can also play a role in terms of how we come out of COVID and making sure that we're growing the commercial industries as well. So for creative industries. So that's what I'll be doing for 22. It's about our own priorities, but it's also laying out clearly how we can make sure. I mean, we've talked about, others talk about levelling up, whatever the phraseology is, but the BBC can play a real role in growing the UK creative economy. And that's an important part of what 22 to 27 is all about, in my view.
And the COVID, the lockdown had started towards the end of this year that this annual report covers. But I mean, you've identified already £125,000 additional savings that you may have to make as a consequence of that. So what do you anticipate the impact of COVID to be going forwards?
Why don't I turn to Glyn, who's in control of all our finances. Well, I'm in control, but Glyn knows the detail, just for the record. Glyn, do you want to just give a quick update on the 125? That'd be helpful, thanks.
Yeah, sure. So you're right, there has been an impact from our commercial side of the business, studios, global news, as well as studio works. So we have a fall in income and a consequent fall in profitability. So we'll be paying less dividend out of those businesses this year to public service. Net, we've set ourselves a target of 125 million this year in terms of savings. And also that includes the cost of deferring the collection of over 75 as well, which cost us 70 million this year. We're making good progress against that this year. So we've had to reshape our content budget in the year. We've reduced our marketing spend, and then we've looked at across all our staff costs, and we have a recruitment freeze at the moment for non-broadcast critical roles. We've also got the voluntary redundancy program in place, and we've frozen senior pay for the annual pay increase this year. And we've also had to reduce some of our capital spend. So we had a project planned in Northern Ireland to look at the technology and build of that property, which is the Northern Ireland HQ. And we've deferred that project for now. So we've made savings across the piece. I mean, looking forward, it's such an uncertain commercial position at the moment, isn't it? So we want to get our productions up and running. We've had a lot of success in that so far. So broadly 60 to 70 of them are now back up in business. There are additional costs we're incurring to keep people COVID safe on production. So there's a sort of wide-ranging set of issues, got to say. And some of it is also looking at the impact on UK and global advertising markets. So clearly we had a bump and quite a downward trend in the first few months of the year and during lockdown. It's picked up a bit subsequently, but broadly we think that could be 20% down this year, but we're hoping that the position won't be as bad next year. So we have to look at, as Tim says, driving value for money around how we spend all our money at the BBC, and that's never been more important than now, and having to absorb some of these extra savings, which is a challenge.
And so, are there many projects that have been cancelled or delayed? From BBC Studios or revenues from licensing bans. What's the impact of that?
So before we get to having to deliver savings, we have had some obviously kind of big events that have been deferred into next year. So some of the sporting events this year got deferred, the Olympics and Euros 21. We've had drama productions that have we've had to defer getting them started. And actually, this is where we really welcome the government's support in putting in a production insurance scheme for us, because that gives us some level of underpinning and security, like the rest of the indie production business around. So if we had to step down productions again in the future, then the cost of COVID, we have some financial cover for that, which is really welcome and really helpful. So we have looked at a number of sort of projects. We want to get those back up and running, but the things, capital projects, particularly around buildings, we have deferred because, like everybody else, we're looking at what our likely provision of buildings is going forward if we adopt a more blended way of working for much of our organisation.
Sorry, I'm just going to, before you come in, because you may want to comment on this, it's just that's a field where there are a lot of freelancers who've been particularly hard hit during lockdown. And there's a lot of talent there that have been, because of the way that they've been unable to access any of the assistance that the government's put in place, have gone off to other professions, perhaps. I mean, is there any assessment of whether we've lost talent there, or what, how quickly we can get them back?
I mean, during the lockdown period, I mean, we were, incredibly mindful of the impact on, I suppose, the broader community of people who work with the BBC, including freelancers. And while we weren't able to access the furlough scheme, we supported some of those who were in really dire straits with a hardship fund to loan amounts of money while they had access to government funding through the income support scheme. We also put in place for our broad body of freelancers a similar scheme to furlough. So where they weren't being used but were regular contributors over the last 12 months, and because of our shutdown of some of the productions, we did pay and top up some of their engagement fee for the period of time during the lockdown. So I think we've assisted. I mean, you're right in terms of future and going forward. We are concerned around the ability to continue to support the creative industries, and we've done a lot in that area, and inevitably that will depend on commercial performance, funding of the license fee, things that we can uniquely do to support the creative sector. But I can imagine many people across many businesses are looking at their career at the moment and making quite difficult choices.
I would just say, I'm also chair of the Creative Industries Council, so we've been doing quite a lot of work on this. I think from a BBC point of view, we're at least in line with the industry. Our package of support, I think, is good. By the way, we did take furlough on studios, but because our numbers, we're holding up, we've decided to fund that ourselves rather than call on government funding, which we think was the right thing to do. I think it's a really difficult and interesting position we're in, because the two factors that affect our commercial income through COVID are advertising revenue, which obviously for other PSBs is absolutely critical in terms of where we sit. The latest numbers, we'll see where it goes, seem to be slightly better than some of the really dire predictions about advertising. So that's reasonable news. But when it comes to productions, there's obviously productions like Gardener's World and other things that we managed to keep going literally in the shed through the period. But these major drama productions where there's enormous freelance base, to your question, they are beginning to crawl back. And I've been involved, everyone on the insurance scheme. We need those to be back in production. The truth is the uncertainty levels are high. If we now had to stop EastEnders all the way through to some of the major premium drama, I think at that point, you are facing a situation, and I'm into speculation, so it's dangerous, but freelancers haven't got work for such an extended period as per the wider economy. I think, you begin to look into some quite difficult situations with regard to expertise leaving the industry. I would say at the moment, with the insurance and the fact that we're able, in a COVID-safe way, to deliver the drama productions, or a lot of them now, and they are coming back to life. At the moment, we haven't, my sense is there hasn't been a massive talent drain. There's been enormous hardship, but not a drain. I think if that goes on for a lot longer, we went into a second situation where we couldn't produce, you may be looking at a different problem.
Can I move on to the acquisition of UK TV?
Yes.
I mean, is there a possibility that you paid too much for it?
Well, we bought 50% that we didn't own. We bought it off Discovery. Without going into too much detail, as the head of studios, I am very comfortable with the price we paid. And I think we had a appropriate plan agreed with the BBC board. I suspect the shape of return will be slightly different because of the impacts of the advertising impact in this year. But I think it will still look like a very sensible acquisition.
And I mean, you mentioned the drop in advertising that revenue because of COVID. Has that had a big impact on the performance of UK TV?
Yeah, it's had an impact. I mean, there were some really scary numbers at the beginning of the year as we went into COVID. The kind of people speculating on very, very. I'm careful with numbers because there's other businesses that are trading in this area, but very, very significant falls in advertising. The latest I hear from other PSBs and the market is still, by the way, significant decline, but not at the terrifying levels that were first speculated. So we'll see where that goes. But yeah, the two big impacts for studios. I mean, studios had a record year, 181 EBITDA profit, EBITDA earnings last year. I think the truth for us and for many of these businesses is we're not in the category with airlines and retail where you're looking at, very, not being able to be cash positive or deliver a profit. But you are looking at very significant impacts on your numbers as you see the advertising decline, and two, you push more productions into next year. So studios will not be delivering, I think, under any scenario that I can see, unless I'm completely missing something, 181 EBITDA. And that's where you get to some of the issues we've got. But it will not be, I still see it as a profitable trading business. And UK TV will, I hope, have a profitable good year, because remember, it has pay revenue from what we call affiliates, Sky, others, as well as just the advertising base.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Damien Hines.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to ask you, Tim, if I may, it's a big subject, but ask you briefly about the BBC's distribution strategy in terms of ubiquity, prominence and ownership. And first, do you think it's important or essential that the BBC be represented on every major distribution channel? And if the answer to that is yes, how do you deal with issues as in with smart speakers, for example, where you don't control the interface?
It is pretty critical. I can't see a situation in which I wouldn't say, I'm thinking, is there any situation where we shouldn't be on major? I think it all comes back to the way you phrased the question, which is universality. And I have a background, having sat on the Freeview board, chaired FreeSat. I know that distribution and distribution critically of our services, not just our programs, but our services, iPlayer, BBC One, etc., is absolutely critical. So the answer to your question is yes, we should be on all major platforms. Having said that, we clearly are in a negotiation with some of the big players now in terms of what prominence we get, how we're served up, and how we're represented. And actually, we have to keep strong as the BBC to say that we want two things, frankly, and it's pretty straightforward. And this relates to some conversation we may or may not have time for on the PSB review, which is we need prominence not only for our individual programs, but for our services. And by the way, the data is utterly overwhelming, which is you get attribution and value. If we care about the BBC and you want to value it, you have to, it's not enough just to chuck the programs as individual programs out there. You need them to be on BBC Sounds or iPlayer, or at least be managing our platforms. And that is what we do successfully in the TV market with many platforms. A final point is it is getting tougher, because before, when you were doing a few deals, and I've done them on Freeview and FreeSat with Sky, clearly now, if you look at iPlayer, numerous versions, different smart TV providers, a absolute, and this relates to some of the discussions you'll be having on PSB Review, is vast amounts of people trying to, in inverted commas, own your TV interface, and indeed your speaker. We are having to work very hard to make sure that we've got distribution in all those places.
So obviously you have negotiations with third parties, with hardware manufacturers, with platform providers, and presumably in the future others as well. But just in terms of the regulatory environment, I mean, so long as people can find BBC content, what is your justification? What's your argument for why prominence should be legislated for or in some way regulated for?
It's